Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life. Please take a moment to like and subscribe. It really helps.
All right, so there's been a lot of talk about those mysterious drones flying around at night all over New Jersey and other places.
Right.
Pretty spooky, right?
Yeah, people are definitely kind of freaked out.
Yeah. But what if there's like a simpler explanation? We're going to dive into this theory by John Ferguson.
Okay.
He's the CEO of Saxon Aerospace, and get this, he put this theory out on TikTok,
Yeah.
of all places.
TikTok, that's interesting. I wouldn't think an expert in military drone technology would be on TikTok.
Yeah. Well, that's why we're looking into it.
That's it.
Saxon Aerospace is based in Wichita, Kansas. They actually build drone systems for the military.
Oh, wow.
So Ferguson really knows his stuff here.
So this is a guy who designs and builds these things for a living.
Yeah, he does. And he actually even shows off one of his company's drone systems in the video.
Mm-hmm.
But let's get into his theory. Ferguson doesn't think these drones are up to anything, bad or nefarious or anything. He actually thinks they're on a mission to, like, smell something.
Smell something.
Yeah. And he thinks it might be connected to radioactive material.
Huh. Now that's interesting because he's drawing a parallel here to some drone activity a few years back along the Interstate 70 corridor, where there were suspicions that drones were searching for radioactive material.
Yeah, that's right. And, he also points out something really interesting. Drones typically don't fly at night because they need daylight for, most operations.
Mm-hmm.
But these mystery drones are flying at night, which suggests they're doing something very, very specific.
Yeah, that does make you wonder.
Right.
So how does he explain that?
Well, he says that they're probably equipped with sensors that can detect things that, we can't see, like gas leaks or like you said, radioactive material.
So they're kind of like using these drones, almost like an electronic nose, to sniff out these things?
That's a good way to put it. Like they're flying around at night, sniffing out something we can't see.
Like a high-tech bloodhound.
Yeah. So could these drones be, looking for something dangerous? Ferguson tells this pretty creepy story about a man who claims he actually handled a missing Ukrainian nuclear warhead.
Whoa.
A warhead that was supposedly headed for the U.S.
And what happened?
Well, the unsettling part is that according to this guy, the government kind of ignored his warnings.
Oh, wow. So that really makes you wonder, could there be a connection here? Could these drones be looking for this missing warhead?
Yeah, it's really something to think about. Now, another interesting thing, Ferguson doesn't think these drones are coming from the ocean.
Interesting. Why is that?
He says it's because of the limitations of, what they call multi-copter drones, the ones with the multiple rotors. Not the ones that look like little airplanes.
Right.
Their battery life,
Yeah.
even with, hybrid gas-electric systems.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't let them make that long of a journey.
So he's saying it's just not possible for them to be flying in from like a ship or something out in the ocean.
Yeah, basically he's ruling out that possibility.
Uh-huh.
He thinks they're probably operating from somewhere secret, closer inland, somewhere they can, go out, do their thing and come back without running out of juice.
Makes sense.
So think about this. We've got this top-level drone expert who actually designs these things for the military.
Right.
And he's saying that these mystery drones are on a mission to detect something.
Yeah.
And it could be something dangerous.
And the possibility of it being connected to a missing nuclear warhead, even though that's not confirmed, it just adds another level of, mystery to the whole thing.
Definitely does. Now, Ferguson doesn't go into, like, super technical details about the sensors in the video, but he does say that they can be incredibly sensitive.
It's pretty amazing to think about that, isn't it? That these sensors can be so sophisticated that they can actually detect things like radioactive material from the air.
Yeah, it is. So we've laid out Ferguson's basic argument here, and it's definitely something to think about.
It's fascinating, to think about all the expertise that goes into designing and building these systems. We're talking about Saxon Aerospace, working with the military. So they're dealing with, really high-stakes situations.
Right. These aren't the kind of drones you can just pick up at Best Buy. We're talking about some pretty serious technology here.
Exactly. And that kind of brings us back to those sensors that Ferguson mentioned, in the video. He didn't really get into too much technical detail on TikTok, but I did a little digging into, what kind of sensors might actually be used for these kinds of missions.
Oh, okay. So what are we talking about here?
Well, there are a few possibilities. For detecting things like gas leaks, you might have sensors that can pick up on, changes in the chemical composition of the air. It's like, an incredibly sensitive nose that can sniff out even the tiniest little traces of certain gases.
Oh, wow. So these sensors are basically like electronic bloodhounds.
Pretty much, yeah. Now, for something like radioactive material, you're probably looking at sensors that can detect radiation. These sensors work by measuring the amount of radiation being emitted from a source.
I see. So even if the material itself is hidden, the radiation it gives off could still be picked up by these sensors.
Right, exactly. And because these sensors are mounted on drones, they can cover a much wider area,
Right.
and get closer to potential sources of radiation than you could with ground-based detectors.
Right, that makes sense. So you've got these drones flying around at night
Mhm.
with these super sniffers on board, basically hunting for something that we can't even see.
Yeah, it's pretty wild when you think about it.
It
It's a
is.
fascinating use of technology, but it also, brings up some questions about privacy and surveillance and things like that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Because if they can detect something like radioactive material, who's to say they couldn't be used to detect all sorts of other things, too?
Exactly, and that's definitely something to keep in mind. As this technology continues to develop, now while Ferguson's theory about these drones looking for radioactive material is interesting, it is important to remember that we are working with limited information here.
Right. We always have to consider other possibilities.
Absolutely, there could be other explanations for why these drones are flying around at night. Maybe they're doing environmental surveys or inspecting infrastructure or even, you know, involved in some kind of research project.
Okay, so we've got the possibility of them searching for dangerous materials, but also maybe just doing something more routine, like checking on the environment or infrastructure.
Right, exactly. But the fact that they're flying at night does suggest that whatever they're doing
Is
is, sensitive in some way. Or maybe even secretive.
because, like you said, there are rules and safety concerns about flying drones at night.
Exactly. So if these drones aren't doing anything illegal, then why all the secrecy? It's a puzzle.
It makes you wonder, so where do we go from here? We've got this drone experts theory, which is definitely compelling. But we also have to be open to other explanations.
Exactly. And while we might not have all the answers right now, I think the important thing is to keep asking questions and to explore different perspectives.
Yeah, I agree. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway for our listeners. We're dealing with a situation where there's a lot we don't know. But by understanding the technology involved and thinking about the different possibilities, we can start to make some sense of it all.
Absolutely. And one thing that really stood out to me about Ferguson's analysis was how he completely dismissed the idea of the drones coming from the ocean.
Yeah, he was pretty adamant about that. He was very clear about the limitations
Yeah.
of those multi-copter drones and their battery range.
Right. And that just highlights not only his expertise, but also, how important it is to understand the technical aspects of this issue. If we don't understand how these things work, we can't really evaluate different theories.
So it's not just about taking an expert's word for it. It's about understanding the why behind their conclusion.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the question of those sensors.
Those electronic noses.
Yeah, the more we understand about how they work, the better equipped we are to assess, whether Ferguson is right or not.
So let's dig a little deeper into the world of drone sensors. What kind of technology are we talking about?
Well, there's a whole range of sensors that can be used on drones, each with their own capabilities and limitations. For detecting something like radioactive material, you'd need a sensor that was incredibly sensitive, able to pick up even tiny amounts of radiation.
And what about those gas sensors you mentioned earlier? How do they work?
Well, there are different types. Some of them work by measuring changes in the electrical conductivity of a material. When it comes into contact with a specific gas, others use optical methods, basically shining a light through the air and analyzing how that light is absorbed or scattered by different gases.
So it's not just a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. There's a whole science behind designing and using these sensors.
Absolutely. And the type of sensor you use really depends on what you're trying to detect.
Okay, so we've got these high-tech sensors mounted on drones flying around at night, sniffing out who knows what. It's both fascinating and a little bit creepy, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of is. And it really underscores the importance of understanding what this technology can do and how it could affect our lives.
And let's not forget that Ferguson connected these drones to a possible search for radioactive material. He even brought up that story about the missing Ukrainian nuclear warhead.
Right. And while that story is unconfirmed, it definitely adds you know,
Yeah.
an extra layer of concern to the whole situation.
It does. It makes you think about the potential consequences if these drones are really out there looking for something dangerous.
It does. It raises questions about who's operating these drones and what their motives are and what's being done to ensure public safety.
Right, because if we're talking about a potential nuclear threat, this goes way beyond just simple surveillance or data collection.
Absolutely. And it's a good reminder that while drones can be used for good, they can also be used for, less than honorable purposes.
So we've got this whole mix of things going on here. Technology, national security, public safety, all wrapped up in these mysterious drone sightings.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
It is.
And it's a story that's still unfolding. We don't have all the answers yet. But by understanding the technology, considering different perspectives, and staying informed, we can hopefully start to piece together what's going on.
I agree. And maybe that's the most important message for our listeners. Stay curious, stay informed, stay engaged.
Exactly, because in a world where technology is changing so fast, it's more important than ever to be aware of how it might be affecting our lives.
Well said. Now, while Ferguson's theory about these drones, searching for radioactive material is interesting, we do have to acknowledge that. There could be other explanations for these night flights.
Of course, we can't rule out the possibility
Right.
that they're doing some other kind of surveillance or gathering data for some other reason.
Right. Maybe they're monitoring traffic patterns or tracking wildlife or even, doing market research or something.
It's possible, but the fact that they're operating at night does make you think they're trying to avoid being seen.
So if it's not about national security or public safety, what other reason would someone have to be flying drones around in secret?
That's a great question. What other reasons could there be for someone wanting to collect information
Yeah.
or keep an eye on things under the cover of darkness?
We'll explore that question and more when we come back. We've been talking about John Ferguson's theory and those drones, and he really, he stressed how they could be used to find things like radioactive material.
Yeah, and that brings up a point. Even if these drones aren't looking for, something as crazy as a nuke, just the fact that they could have those sensors really makes you think about privacy.
Yeah, it is kind of unsettling. Like someone could be using drones to,
Yeah.
sniff out info about us without us even knowing.
Exactly. And that's the challenge,
Yeah.
With technology moving so fast, we're seeing all these super advanced drones popping up. And it's not always clear, how they're being used or what it means for our privacy.
Right, so even if they're doing something harmless, like checking the environment, there's still a chance they could be misused.
Absolutely. And that's why it's important to talk about these things,
Yeah.
and have clear rules and protections in place for drone technology.
And we got to find that balance, right?
Yeah.
Between letting technology grow
Right.
and making sure people are protected.
Exactly. And that's where Ferguson's expertise is so valuable. He gets it, He understands both what the technology can do and what it can't do. He's not just some techie. He's actually built these things for serious situations.
Right, and the fact that he's putting this out there on TikTok makes me think he's really worried about how this technology could be used the wrong way.
Yeah, it's like he's trying to warn us. Like, hey, pay attention to this stuff and think about what it could mean.
So what's the big takeaway here for our listeners?
Well, I think the main thing is drones are becoming more advanced and more common. We see them being used for all sorts of things now, delivering packages, helping police, you name it. So it's really important to understand what this tech can do and how it might affect us.
And it's not just about the drones themselves, right? It's about the people behind them. Who's making them? Who's flying them? What are they trying to do?
Exactly. We need to be asking those questions.
Yeah.
And demanding transparency, from the people in charge.
And even if we don't have all the answers right now,
Yeah,
just asking those questions, staying informed, staying engaged, that's what's important.
absolutely. It's how we can make sure this technology is used responsibly.
So we started with a mystery, right? Unidentified drones in the night sky.
People freaking out, wondering what they're up to.
And we looked into John Ferguson's theory, based on his experience designing drones for the military.
And even though we don't know for sure what these drones are doing, we learned a lot about the technology, the potential risks, and why it's so important to stay informed.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more we understand about this stuff, the better choices we can make about our future.
If you enjoyed this episode of While We Were Distracted, be sure to watch the video that inspired it.